A starving teacher walked 2 days without water until a wealthy rancher saved her life. Wild West. The sun had already risen high over the dry, empty plains when Clara, the young schoolteacher, adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel. She looked back at the small settlement she had called home for the past 2 years, the adobe schoolhouse standing quiet and empty, its windows dusty and its wooden door slightly ajar. The bell that had once called children to class now hung silent, swaying faintly in the morning breeze. Clara took a deep breath and felt a weight settle over her chest. She had devoted herself to teaching the children of this frontier town, but the drought and poverty had left the town unable to pay her wages. There was no work, no food, and the school had closed for good. For days she had debated what to do: stay and wait for a miracle that would not come, or leave and take her chances in the open wilderness. She had no money, no horse, and only a small amount of supplies packed in her satchel. Her shoes were scuffed, her skirts were dusty, and her lips were already chapped from the dry wind. Yet, despite all this, she knew she could not stay. She had to keep moving. Clara tightened the straps of her satchel and stepped onto the dirt road that led away from the settlement. The road was little more than a dusty track, winding through low hills and dry creeks. The landscape stretched endlessly, a canvas of beige and brown, punctuated only by the occasional scrub brush or jagged rock. She had heard rumors of a larger town several days' ride to the east, a place with stores, water, and perhaps even work for a teacher. She told herself it was not far, only a day's walk, though the map in her mind was sketchy at best. The first few hours were tolerable. The morning sun was warm but not yet punishing, and Clara tried to set a steady pace. She kept her satchel on her shoulder, shifting it occasionally to relieve the strain. She drank sparingly from the small canteen she had managed to fill the night before, knowing she had to conserve every drop. The landscape around her was silent except for the faint rustle of dry grass and the occasional call of a distant bird. She kept her eyes on the horizon, counting hills and valleys, trying to measure her progress. By midday, the sun had climbed higher, and the air shimmered with heat. Clara's steps slowed as the sweat began to soak her blouse and trickle down her back. She stopped under the shade of a lone mesquite tree to rest, placing her hands on her knees and letting out a quiet sigh. She looked around at the endless expanse of desert, the way the light made everything pale and almost unreal. Even in this harshness, there was beauty, strange, quiet, and unforgiving. She drank another small sip from her canteen, and it was barely enough to moisten her mouth. Her tongue felt thick, her throat dry and scratchy. The weight of her satchel pressed more heavily on her shoulder with every step. She knew that water was running low, and the thought of reaching the next settlement seemed further away with every passing hour. As she walked, memories of her students came back to her. Little Anna with her bright eyes and endless questions, Samuel who loved to read aloud, and a dozen others who had depended on her guidance. She wondered if they had food to eat, if they were safe. The thought made her chest ache, and for a moment she almost wished she could turn back. But she knew that there was nothing for her there anymore. She could not help them if she did not survive herself. The terrain began to change as the afternoon sun climbed higher. Flat plains gave way to small hills, the ground harder and more uneven. Clara stumbled over loose rocks and dry brush, her energy dwindling. She could feel the heat pressing down on her, making her movements sluggish. Her water supply was almost gone, and she was careful to take only tiny sips, each one a bitter reminder of how little she had left. Hours passed, and the sun began to lean toward the west. The shadows of rocks and brush grew long, but the air did not cool. It felt as if the earth itself was holding heat in its hands, refusing to let it go. Clara's pace slowed to a crawl. Every step required effort, every breath felt heavy. She had to remind herself to keep moving, to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Stopping was not an option, even though her body screamed for rest. Her mind began to wander. She thought about her family back in the East and the letters she had sent that never received replies. She thought about the world beyond the desert, a place that seemed like a distant dream. She thought about giving up, but even the thought was fleeting. Something inside her refused to let go. She was not ready to surrender to the desert. Night began to fall, and with it, a cooler breeze brushed against her face. She found herself near a dry creek bed and lowered herself to the ground, leaning against a rock. The stars began to appear one by one, pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. She took another small sip of water, and it felt like a drop of life in her mouth. The world around her had grown silent, except for the soft whisper of wind across sand and rock. Exhaustion was pressing down on her, but she forced herself to rest only briefly. Sleeping meant she might not wake again. She had to keep moving, even if only a little farther. She looked at the horizon, trying to imagine the settlement she hoped to reach. It seemed so far away, almost unreal in the growing darkness. Her thoughts returned to the children once more. She wondered if they would understand why she had to leave, if they would remember her lessons, her stories. The memory gave her a strange comfort, a sense of purpose she could cling to as she continued through the night. Every step was a battle, every breath a reminder of how fragile life could be in this harsh land. By the early hours of the morning, Clara's strength was failing. Her legs ached, her mouth was parched, and the canteen was now empty. She pressed on, driven by will alone, by the memory of those who depended on her and by the hope that somewhere ahead there was safety. The road stretched endlessly before her, shadows stretching long and unfamiliar in the moonlight. She stumbled often, once falling to her hands and knees, feeling the dry soil scrape her palms. Each time she forced herself to rise, knowing that giving up was not an option. She whispered encouragements to herself, small phrases like, "Keep moving," and "almost there," even though she had no idea how far there really was. As dawn approached, her body ached, and her mind wavered between reality and exhaustion-induced dreams. She saw visions of children smiling, of the schoolhouse standing whole and bright. She imagined water flowing in a clear stream, and she reached toward it only to find empty air. Her throat burned, her lips cracked, and her vision blurred. And yet, somewhere deep inside, Clara refused to give up. She knew she had to survive. There was no one to help her, no one to carry her, only the desert stretching endlessly before her and the faint hope of a settlement somewhere beyond the hills. She set her jaw, tightened the strap of her satchel once more, and took another step into the vast, unforgiving land. The morning sun rose fully, painting the world in shades of gold and brown. Clara's shadow stretched long behind her, small and fragile against the wide expanse. She continued walking, driven by determination, by memory, and by the faint, unyielding hope that somewhere ahead help awaited. The second day began with a pale orange glow on the horizon. Clara opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff from the night spent on the cold, rough ground. Her throat was dry, her mouth coated with a thin layer of dust, and her legs trembled as she forced herself to sit up. She had slept only in short bursts, never fully relaxed, because she knew the desert could be unforgiving at any moment. Every noise in the distance, a coyote's howl, the rustle of dry leaves, kept her alert. The first light of dawn did little to warm her spirits. The road ahead stretched endlessly, and she had no water left. She swung her legs over the side of the rock she had leaned against the night before, and rose slowly, gripping her satchel to steady herself. Each step was an effort. Her muscles ached from the day before, and the blisters forming on her feet burned with every movement. The desert sun had not yet risen fully, but the air was already warm, dry, and heavy. Clara forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. She had to keep moving, no matter how much her body protested. Hours passed in silence. The world was quiet except for the soft sound of wind moving across the sand and rocks. Clara's steps became slower, her head drooping occasionally as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. Her mind began to drift. She remembered her father teaching her to read maps, to understand the signs of weather, to respect the land. But this was different. The desert was vast, merciless, and indifferent. No lessons could fully prepare anyone for the kind of hunger and thirst that gnawed at her now. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, its heat pressing down relentlessly. Clara's lips cracked further, and her tongue felt swollen and heavy. Each step left a footprint in the dry earth, a small mark of her presence in an otherwise empty world. She tried to focus on the horizon, imagining that a rise in the distance might conceal a stream or a settlement, but the hills only seemed to stretch further away. She reached for her empty canteen, hoping to find even a drop remaining, and realized it was dry. Panic began to creep in, though she forced it down. She could not give herself the luxury of despair. She whispered to herself, "Keep moving." Almost there, just a little farther. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to remind her that she was alive. By late morning, the desert heat was oppressive. Her skin burned under the unrelenting sun, and sweat poured down her back. She tried to walk in the sparse shade of occasional bushes, but there was almost none to be found. Her energy drained quickly, and her legs ached more than they had the day before. Every step became a struggle, and she stumbled often, catching herself on rocks or clumps of dry grass. As she moved, Clara's thoughts returned to the children she had taught. She remembered their laughter, the small triumphs of learning to read and write, and the pride in their eyes when they mastered something new. Those memories gave her a strange strength. Even in the face of thirst and exhaustion, she clung to the thought of them, as if their memory could push her forward when her own body could not. By noon, Clara's vision began to blur slightly. She saw mirages on the horizon, pools of water shimmering in the distance, only to vanish when she approached. Each time her heart sank a little, and her throat ached more. She forced herself to ignore the illusions and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Step by step she moved, though every movement required intense effort. Her body was screaming for rest, but stopping felt dangerous. She knew that in this harsh land, a pause too long could mean she might not start again. She pressed her lips together, fighting the dizziness, and leaned on her satchel for support. She could feel her pulse quickening, her heart beating hard against her chest. Every breath was shallow and labored, but she forced herself to continue. Around mid-afternoon, she came across a dry wash, a shallow creek bed that had not seen water for months. She rested there briefly, letting herself sink to the ground. Her knees dug into the hard, sun-baked earth, and she leaned forward, elbows on her thighs, head down. Her body shook from exhaustion, and she felt a faint nausea rise in her throat. Yet she drank no water here because there was none. She had learned in the past hours that drinking unclean or unknown water could be dangerous. Survival meant caution as much as endurance. Time passed slowly, the sun moving across the sky like a merciless clock. Clara's movements became jerky and uneven, her legs stiff and sore. At one point, she nearly fell face first into the dirt, catching herself just in time. Her satchel slipped from her shoulder, and she had to stop and lift it again, each motion costing her precious energy. Her mind was foggy now. Thoughts came and went in fragments. She clung to memories of family, home, and students, using them as tiny anchors in the vast emptiness around her. As the afternoon wore on, dehydration began to affect her more severely. Her mouth and throat burned, her eyes ached, and she could no longer swallow comfortably. Her head felt heavy, and she started to see spots of light in her peripheral vision. She took deep breaths, trying to steady herself, but her body seemed to betray her at every turn. She walked more slowly, pausing often to regain balance, leaning on rocks or bushes for support. At one point, Clara found herself staring at a distant hill, convinced that she could see a building or a structure at the top. Her heart leapt, but as she moved closer, the outline dissolved into nothingness. She sank to the ground, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Frustration, fear, and exhaustion mixed into a heavy weight in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Keep going. You can't stop. You have to survive." The desert was testing her, and she was determined not to fail. Even as the day wore on, the temperature remained high. Clara's skin glistened with sweat, her hair sticking to her face, her clothes damp and heavy. She forced herself to keep moving, though each step became more painful than the last. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, and every joint in her body protested. But she refused to give in. Every fiber of her being was focused on one thing: survival. By late afternoon, Clara's steps became almost mechanical. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her thoughts became disjointed. She thought she heard voices, imagined the sound of running water, and sometimes swore she saw figures moving in the distance. Each time she shook her head and pressed onward, knowing that hope could be a dangerous illusion in the desert. She had learned to trust only her strength and determination, even when both felt fragile. As evening approached, Clara's body began to falter completely. Her legs gave out beneath her, forcing her to crawl short distances at times. She rested whenever she could find a small patch of shade or a rock to lean against, but the respite was brief. She knew she could not stay down too long, not without risking collapse. She kept moving, though her pace was now painfully slow, her mind clouded by exhaustion and dehydration. By twilight, the desert around her had grown cooler, but Clara felt no relief. Her mouth was parched, her throat raw, and her eyes were heavy with fatigue. The once clear horizon had become a blur, and she could no longer see far ahead. Yet something inside her refused to give up. She thought of her students, her home, and the life she still hoped to live. That memory, that small spark of purpose, pushed her to continue, even when her body screamed otherwise. Finally, as night fell, Clara stumbled into a shallow depression in the land, her energy spent. She collapsed against the earth, barely able to breathe. Her mind drifted between reality and exhaustion-induced visions. She saw the children smiling, the schoolhouse bright and alive, and imagined water flowing freely. She clung to those images as if they were a lifeline. She knew she could not stop entirely. She could not give up. Somewhere ahead, she hoped, there would be help. Her body trembled as she lay there, every muscle aching, every thought heavy. The stars began to appear in the dark sky, faint pinpoints of light against the vast emptiness. Clara whispered to herself, "I have to keep going. I will survive." Her voice was barely audible, a fragile promise in the stillness of the desert. And despite the fear, despite the exhaustion, she forced herself to rise, determined to take one more step, one more, toward the hope she could barely see, but refused to let go of. The second day had been merciless. Every step had tested her strength. Every moment had pushed her endurance to its limit. Yet Clara walked on, driven by the quiet, stubborn determination of someone who refused to be defeated. The desert was vast and harsh, but her will was stronger. Somewhere ahead, she told herself, there would be water, shelter, and the chance to live another day. And with that thought, she moved forward into the approaching night, small and fragile against the endless land, but alive and unwilling to surrender. The early morning air was crisp and dry when Clara opened her eyes again. She was lying on a patch of sandy ground, her head throbbing and her body trembling from exhaustion and dehydration. The night had brought a small relief from the heat, but it had done little to restore her strength. Every movement was painful, every breath a struggle. She tried to lift herself, but her legs barely obeyed. She knew she could not go far without help, yet the thought of stopping completely filled her with fear. She had survived 2 days in the desert, and the thought of being unable to continue terrified her more than the sun or the heat ever had. As she forced herself to rise, she saw movement in the distance. At first it was nothing more than a shadow, a flicker against the browns and golds of the desert. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was a figure on horseback, moving slowly along the ridge of a nearby hill. Her heart leapt, but caution told her to remain still, to observe before calling out. She waved weakly, her arm trembling, but the rider did not see her. She tried again, calling out in a weak voice, her words hoarse and strained. "Help! Please, someone! Help!" Her voice barely carried in the dry, open air, but the figure paused and looked in her direction. Relief flooded her, but it was mixed with fear. She was too weak to make herself run or even wave properly. All she could do was wait, hoping that whoever it was would come closer. The rider, a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, adjusted his horse and began moving down the slope toward her. Clara could see now that he was older, tall and solidly built, with careful, steady movements that suggested experience and patience. He had a calm, quiet presence, and there was a careful thoughtfulness in the way he guided his horse. As he approached, Clara felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her chest. Perhaps she would survive this ordeal after all. When the man reached her, he dismounted and quickly scanned the area around her. Without speaking, he knelt beside her, studying her condition. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. He handed her a canteen filled with water and guided her lips to it, letting her drink slowly. The cool water was like fire against her parched throat, giving her a strength she had not felt in hours. She drank carefully, too weak to consume too much at once, but each sip felt like life returning to her body. The man helped her sit upright and supported her as she leaned against his horse. She was trembling violently, and her body sagged with weakness, but he spoke only in quiet, steady tones. "Take your time," he said. "No need to rush. You've been through a lot." His voice was calm, reassuring, and filled with an authority that made her feel safe. She nodded weakly, unable to speak at first, but her eyes conveyed her gratitude. He lifted her gently onto the horse behind him, careful not to hurt her. The weight of her exhaustion was heavy, but she was safe now, and that thought alone lifted some of the fear that had been gnawing at her all day. The man guided the horse slowly, moving toward a nearby ranch that he said was not far. Clara's body relaxed slightly with the motion, the rhythm of the horse's steps almost lulling her into a light stupor. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest against the man's back, feeling a faint warmth in her chest as hope began to replace despair. As they rode, Clara finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. Her throat was raw, but the words came out with genuine emotion. The man nodded but said nothing, focusing instead on keeping the horse steady. He was clearly experienced with both horses and people in trouble, and his quiet confidence reassured her in ways that words could not. The ride was slow, careful, and deliberate. Every few minutes he would stop and offer her more water, speaking quietly and encouragingly. He asked little about her journey, only enough to understand how weak she was. He seemed to know that she had endured something extreme, and that pressing her for details now could do more harm than good. Clara, in turn, found herself too exhausted to explain. The story of the past 2 days remained mostly unspoken, lingering in her mind like a heavy shadow. After an hour, the ranch came into view. The buildings were modest but sturdy, a testament to someone who understood the challenges of the land. The main house was a simple wooden structure with a wide porch and a low roof, surrounded by fenced pastures and small corrals. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney, suggesting that someone had already started their morning chores. Clara's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and awe. The sight of civilization, of shelter and human care, felt like a miracle after the endless, harsh desert. The man guided the horse to the porch and carefully helped Clara dismount. Her legs were weak, and she stumbled slightly, but he caught her gently and led her inside. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a large wooden table, a fireplace, and a few chairs. The warmth of the room was comforting, and the smell of fresh bread and cooking meat filled the air. Clara realized for the first time in 2 days how much she had been craving comfort, warmth, and safety. He guided her to a chair and encouraged her to sit while he brought her a cloth dampened with cool water. She pressed it to her forehead, feeling the relief spread slowly through her aching body. He offered her more water in a cup, which she drank carefully. Each sip brought a little color back to her cheeks and a little strength to her limbs. Her lips cracked in a faint smile, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax slightly. Finally, after some time, he spoke.
"You've been through a hard journey," he said softly.
"Rest here, you're safe." Clara wanted to speak, to explain everything, but the words caught in her throat. She nodded instead, feeling tears of relief and exhaustion prick at her eyes. She realized that she had survived 2 days in the desert, and it was this man, a stranger, who had saved her life. As the hours passed, Clara's body slowly regained strength. She drank more water, ate a small portion of food, and leaned back against the chair. The man remained nearby, quietly moving about the room, tending to chores and ensuring she had what she needed. There was a gentle rhythm to his care, a quiet attentiveness that made her feel valued and safe. She watched him, realizing that he was not only strong and capable, but also patient and understanding. Eventually, curiosity overcame her exhaustion. "Why? Why did you stop for me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. The man paused, considering his answer carefully. "I saw you struggling," he said simply. "No one should face that land alone and unprepared. I couldn't just ride past, that's all." His words were plain, but they carried weight. There was no judgment, no expectation of thanks, only quiet humanity. Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect for the man who had saved her life. The afternoon passed quietly, with Clara resting and the rancher moving about his work. Occasionally he would speak softly, asking if she needed anything, or simply offering a word of comfort. Clara found herself watching him, noticing the careful way he moved, the way he handled both the horse and the house. She began to understand that this man had spent a lifetime learning the harsh lessons of the land, and yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that inspired trust. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Clara felt a small spark of hope growing inside her. She had survived the desert, been rescued, and was now safe in a place where she could regain her strength. Her mind, still clouded by exhaustion, began to consider the future. Perhaps there was a way to continue her journey, to find work, and to rebuild a life beyond the desert's harsh grip. By evening, Clara felt strong enough to move about the room slightly, to stretch her legs and begin to regain some of her former energy. The rancher offered her a small bed to rest for the night, and she accepted gratefully, feeling a sense of safety she had not known in days. She lay down, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the occasional creak of the building, the distant calls of animals settling in for the night, and the soft, steady presence of the man who had saved her. For the first time in 2 days, Clara allowed herself to feel something she had not felt since leaving the settlement: hope. The desert had been harsh and merciless, testing her in ways she had never imagined. Yet she had survived. And now, thanks to the kindness and care of a stranger, she had a chance to live, to recover, and to continue her journey. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would not forget this day, this man, or the lessons of survival she had learned. The desert was still out there, vast and unforgiving, but she had faced it and lived. And for the first time in days, she felt the faint stirrings of strength, courage, and hope returning to her body and spirit. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, painting the wooden floor with pale stripes of light. Clara stirred slowly in the small bed the rancher had prepared for her. Her body still felt weak, her muscles sore from 2 days of relentless walking and dehydration. But for the first time, she felt a sense of safety that allowed her to relax. The events of the past 2 days, the struggle through the desert, the near collapse, and the rescue, swirled in her mind, and she realized just how close she had come to losing everything. She rose carefully, testing her strength. The rancher, noticing her movement from across the room, offered a small nod of approval. He had already prepared a simple breakfast: bread, cheese, and some fresh fruit. Clara sat at the table, taking small bites, savoring the taste of food that did not come from a dusty bag or a tin can. She realized how hungry she had been, how much she had taken proper nourishment for granted in the past. Every bite felt restorative, and she ate slowly, listening to the quiet rhythm of the ranch around her. As she ate, she glanced around the house, noticing the careful attention to detail. The rooms were simple yet orderly and well kept. Tools were arranged neatly on walls, shelves lined with supplies, and the faint scent of smoke from the fireplace mingled with the aroma of fresh bread. It was clear that the rancher had lived here a long time, had learned the ways of the land, and had built a life grounded in both work and care. Clara found herself admiring the quiet dignity of the place, and by extension, the man who had saved her. Once breakfast was finished, the rancher suggested a short walk around the property. Clara hesitated, but he gently encouraged her, explaining that moving her legs would help her regain strength. She accepted, stepping cautiously at first, then gradually finding her footing. The fresh air, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of birds, worked like a balm on her weary spirit. She felt more alive than she had in days, more connected to the world around her. As they walked, Clara found herself asking small questions about the rancher, about the land, and about life on the frontier. He answered simply, honestly, and without unnecessary detail, offering glimpses into a life shaped by hard work, resilience, and the quiet understanding of the harsh land. He spoke of tending the cattle, maintaining fences, and the challenges of surviving the long, dry summers. Clara listened intently, sensing that every word reflected a lifetime of experience, wisdom, and care. For his part, the rancher asked little about her journey. He did not press her for details, though he noticed the fatigue still lingering in her movements. and the dark circles under her eyes. His quiet observation made her feel understood without the need for explanation or defense. Clara realized that he was the kind of person who acted out of instinct and humanity, who did what was right without seeking recognition. But she respected him for that, and in turn felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond simple thanks. After the walk, they returned to the house, and Clara rested again. She felt the strength slowly returning, her body adjusting to the nourishment and rest. She reflected on the past 2 days and the miracle of her rescue. It was strange to think that she had been moments from collapse, and yet here she was, alive, safe, and slowly recovering. The thought filled her with both relief and humility. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, and survival depended on strength, resilience, and sometimes the kindness of strangers. As the afternoon sun climbed, Clara began to ask more about the rancher's life. She learned that he had lost his family to illness many years ago, leaving him to manage the ranch alone. His expression softened as he spoke, but there was no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance of life's hardships. Clara understood then why he had stopped for her in the desert. He knew the value of life, the importance of human care, and the necessity of action when someone was in need. His experience and compassion were deeply evident, and she found herself admiring the quiet courage that had guided his decisions. During the conversation, Clara noticed small details that revealed the man's character. The careful way he tended to the horse, the way he checked the locks on the doors, the methodical arrangement of tools and supplies. She realized that his life had been shaped by both responsibility and solitude, and that this combination had created a person who could act decisively in moments of crisis. It made her feel safe, but it also inspired a deep respect. Here was someone who had endured loss, mastered the land, and chosen to extend help to a stranger without expectation. As the day wore on, Clara began to feel a new sense of purpose. She realized that her journey was far from over, but she also understood that she could not continue without first regaining her strength. The rancher allowed her the time she needed, guiding her gently but never pressuring her. She appreciated this more than she could express. It was a rare kindness, a space to recover fully before facing the next challenge. By late afternoon, Clara had regained enough strength to sit on the porch and watch the sun dip toward the horizon. The ranch stretched out before her, quiet and expansive, with cattle grazing and the faint outline of hills in the distance. She breathed deeply, appreciating the stillness, the safety, and the sense of life returning to her body. The desert that had threatened to claim her now seemed distant, almost unreal, replaced by the warmth and order of the ranch. The rancher joined her on the porch, and for the first time they spoke more personally. He asked about her background, the school, and her students. She told him briefly, careful not to overwhelm herself with details, and he listened with quiet interest. There was no judgment, no assumptions, only genuine attention. Clara found herself opening up slowly, realizing that she had not spoken to anyone for days in a way that felt meaningful or safe. There was a relief, a comfort she had not anticipated. Evening fell, and with it a gentle coolness settled over the land. Clara felt the fatigue from the previous days finally give way to a sense of calm. She understood now that she could not have survived without the rancher's help, and she felt a deep, almost reverent gratitude. Yet it was not just gratitude for the immediate act of saving her life. It was respect for the man's character, for the quiet strength he had shown, and for the lessons he had imparted simply by living with integrity and care. Before retiring for the night, Clara reflected on what had brought her here. The desert had tested her endurance, her spirit, and her determination. It had stripped her of comfort, food, water, and security. And yet, through it all, she had survived. Her rescue had been timely, miraculous even, but it had also revealed something she had not realized, that human connection, courage, and compassion were as vital to survival as food and water. She had been saved not just by the rancher's water and shelter, but by his patience, understanding, and quiet attention to her needs. As she lay in bed, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch, horses shifting in their stalls, the soft creak of the wind in the porch boards, the faint murmur of the rancher moving about, she allowed herself to feel hope again. The desert was still out there, harsh and unforgiving, but she had been given a second chance. She would recover, rebuild, and continue her journey. And she knew, in the quiet depths of her heart, that she would carry this experience with her forever. The night was calm, and sleep came gently for the first time in days. Clara's body relaxed fully, her breathing deep and steady. She felt the warmth of the ranch surrounding her, a safety that contrasted sharply with the merciless desert she had endured. The quiet strength of the man who had saved her, combined with the stillness of the land, provided a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. When she awoke the next morning, she felt stronger, more alert, and ready to face the challenges ahead. The rancher offered her breakfast, and they spoke briefly of the day's tasks. Clara realized that she was ready to begin taking small steps toward independence again, knowing she had a place to recover and a person she could trust. She understood that her journey was far from over, but the desert no longer seemed insurmountable. She had been tested and had survived, and she had learned the quiet value of endurance, courage, and human kindness. Clara's recovery continued slowly over the next several days, and in that time she learned more about the rancher and his life. She discovered that he had endured loss and hardship, yet he carried no bitterness. His quiet wisdom, patience, and sense of responsibility made her realize that there were people who acted with integrity simply because it was the right thing to do. This understanding deepened her respect for him and inspired her own strength. By the time she felt fully capable of standing and walking without help, Clara knew that her life had changed. The desert had left its mark, but it had also revealed her resilience and the importance of human connection. The rancher's care had saved her, not just physically, but emotionally, and she would carry the lessons of these days with her forever. The morning air was cool and fresh when Clara stepped outside the ranch house. The sun was just rising, casting long golden streaks across the hills and pastures. She breathed deeply, savoring the warmth and the gentle breeze. After several days of rest, nourishment, and care, she finally felt strong again. Her body no longer trembled with exhaustion, and her muscles, though still sore, were ready to move. She knew she could continue her journey now, though a part of her did not want to leave the safety and quiet of the ranch that had saved her life. The rancher appeared beside her, calm and steady as always. He had already begun his morning chores, tending to the animals and checking fences, but he paused to look at her with a quiet smile. "You're ready," he said simply. Clara nodded. She had been ready in body for a while, but it was her mind and heart that were now catching up. She felt a mix of gratitude, hesitation, and resolve. She had survived, and now she had to take the next steps in her life. Before she left, the rancher handed her a small bundle of supplies. There was food for the road, a canteen filled with water, and a map of the surrounding area. "It's not far to the next settlement," he said. "Follow the path marked here. Stay on the high ground, and you'll find water along the way." Clara accepted the bundle carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hands. But more than the physical supplies, she felt the reassurance that someone cared for her well-being and had prepared her for what lay ahead. Clara paused on the porch, looking back at the house one last time. She had grown to respect the quiet dignity of the rancher, to understand his strength, and to appreciate his patience and care. Without saying much, he had given her the chance to survive and recover, without demanding anything in return. She realized that true kindness was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, patient, and thoughtful. She felt a deep gratitude that was hard to put into words. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The rancher nodded once. "Take care," he replied. "And remember, strength comes not just from the body, but from persistence and care. Keep that with you." Clara felt the truth in his words, and she promised herself she would carry them forward. She adjusted her satchel and began to walk down the path that led away from the ranch. The road stretched before her, familiar now as the one she had walked in desperation 2 days before. But everything felt different. She was no longer weak, thirsty, and desperate. She had been tested by the harshness of the desert and survived, thanks to her own determination and the quiet help of another person. Each step she took felt purposeful, confident, and grounded in the knowledge that she could endure. As she walked, she thought about the future. The nearest settlement was still a day's journey away, but she now had the supplies and strength to reach it safely. She imagined finding work, perhaps teaching again, and rebuilding her life. The desert behind her had been a place of struggle and near loss, but it had also revealed something profound: resilience and the importance of human connection. She realized that survival was not just about enduring hardship, but also about accepting help when it was offered, learning from it, and moving forward. The landscape shifted as she moved east, the desert giving way to low hills and scattered groves. Clara paused to drink from her canteen, savoring the cool water, and then continued along the path. She kept her eyes on the horizon, but she also took the time to notice the small details around her: the patterns of the rocks, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant flight of a hawk. After days of focusing only on survival, she now had the clarity and calm to appreciate the world around her. Along the way, she reflected on the lessons of the past days. She had learned that the desert, though harsh and unforgiving, could be met with patience, determination, and respect. She had discovered her own resilience, the strength of her body and mind, and the power of hope. But she had also learned something perhaps even more important: the value of kindness, compassion, and quiet care from another human being. Without the rancher, she might not have survived. With him, she had not only lived, but learned the meaning of trust and patience. By late afternoon, Clara saw signs of the settlement ahead. Smoke from chimneys rose faintly in the distance, and the outline of buildings emerged against the sky. Her pace quickened slightly, but she remained careful. She had learned from her journey that haste could lead to mistakes, and she wanted to arrive safely, fully aware and prepared. As she neared the settlement, she saw people moving about: children playing, adults tending animals or preparing for evening chores. The world had returned to her, vibrant and alive, after the stillness and isolation of the desert. When she entered the settlement, Clara felt a sense of belonging that she had not experienced for many days. The people she met were kind and curious, asking her where she had come from and if she needed assistance. She answered honestly, explaining briefly that she had traveled through the desert and was now seeking work. Their faces showed concern but also respect for her endurance. She felt the relief of being seen, acknowledged, and welcomed into a community once again. Clara quickly found a position at the small schoolhouse in the settlement. The children were eager to learn, and she found joy in their curiosity, laughter, and energy. Teaching again reminded her of the purpose that had driven her before her journey into the desert. She applied herself with renewed vigor, knowing that she had faced and survived something far greater than any challenge within the classroom. The desert had tested her limits, but it had also reinforced her dedication, patience, and resilience. Though she was grateful for the settlement and the opportunity to work again, Clara never forgot the rancher. She thought of him often, remembering the quiet patience, the careful guidance, and the unwavering attention he had given her when she was at her weakest. She realized that the act of saving her life had been more than physical. It had been a profound lesson in humanity, patience, and courage. The desert had been harsh, but the rancher had restored her faith in the simple yet powerful acts of kindness that could change a life. Months later, Clara looked back on the desert with a mixture of awe and humility. She had survived its harshness, learned from it, and been forever changed by it. She continued teaching, building her life in the settlement, and carrying the lessons of endurance, hope, and kindness with her. And in her heart she held gratitude for the rancher whose quiet courage had not only saved her life, but had shown her the depth of human compassion. Though the desert remained vast and unforgiving, Clara no longer feared it in the same way. She had faced it and lived. She had learned the value of resilience, the importance of care from others, and the quiet strength that came from enduring hardship with determination and dignity. She walked forward with a new confidence, ready to face life's challenges, knowing that she had survived the worst and learned the power of hope and human connection. In the quiet evenings, when she sat by the window of the schoolhouse and watched the sun sink behind the hills, she thought of the rancher and the safety of his home. She understood that her life had been forever changed by that brief intersection of paths in the desert. She had learned that even in the harshest circumstances, there could be compassion, guidance, and a second chance. And with that knowledge, she felt stronger, wiser, and ready to live fully. The journey had been long, painful, and testing. But Clara had survived, and in surviving, she had discovered the resilience of the human spirit, the value of kindness, and the courage that lies within even the most vulnerable moments. She carried these lessons with her every day, teaching her students not only reading and writing, but also the quiet strength and dignity of endurance, hope, and humanity. And though the desert would always remain a memory of hardship, it was now balanced by the memory of a man who had stopped, offered care without expectation, and reminded her that life, even in the harshest conditions, could be met with courage, dignity, and kindness.